My relationship with portfolio management starts almost 20 years ago. And my first exposure was in 2002. During my MBA, of course, it had a financial spin, portfolio management for investments, financial investments. But then I remember in this very conference 16 years ago, I did two presentations in 2006 and 2007 on portfolio management, on project portfolio management, in fact. And then the next year on PMI's Organizational Project Management Maturity Model, the OPM3. Since then, I've been involved in consulting projects, helping organizations with their project management, but also setting up portfolio management processes and portfolio office. In 2015 and 17, respectively, we published internally at the Commission the first PfM² guide for project portfolio management. In 2019, at DigiIT, we published internally procedures for portfolio management within the organization. And then last year, about this time, all this experience has matured and put into one open source methodology called PfM², where is basically framing my presentation today. Just to make sure that we're all in the right presentation. If you're young and beautiful and you're looking into a modeling career, this is not the portfolio management lecture or presentation you're looking for. We're here to talk about organizational portfolio management. Start by framing our conversation with the fact or the change in perspective that projects, as we know them, running within organizations, are all organizational investments. An organization can choose to put their time, money, and effort in anything that they choose to, but they choose specific projects because they're expecting a return. One more slide to remind us of the basic project objectives, but here it's important to stress that every project has 4 objectives. The scope objectives, what we're going to do and build and deliver, but also very important in terms of an investment, a cost and time objective, because we know that an investment matures and we expect to get our money back and further gains within a certain time horizon, and based on the assumption that our initial investment is constrained by a certain cost, the cost objective that was going to allow us for this to be a good investment opportunity. And of course, if we think of projects as investments, immediately we integrate risk into the equation. And we're talking about 2 types of risks. We're talking about the business case risk, the business investment risk, and the implementation risk. So 2 types of risk that make project management and managing projects as investments particularly challenging and risky. So where do projects come from? Usually we're involved at the point where a project has been defined and we understand a project from its scope and its other objectives, cost, time, and quality. And we know that a project delivers something unique, unique output. But where does this project come from? It comes from the organization expecting to solve, to offer a solution to a problem, a need, or an opportunity that has been recognized as strategically relevant and as worth investing in to solve. The outputs of a project are just a means to an end, because the real purpose, as packaged also in the business case that got our project approved, are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve, which will deliver benefits and essentially value to our organization. So the focuses of a project is the project output relationship. Maybe we can expand to include a little bit of view on the outcomes, but essentially is limited for good tactical and efficiency reasons. And then if we want to look at the focus of a program, it's slightly wider. That follows, the whole investment up until benefits and value creation, when these constructs are defined indeed as effective programs. So let's look at what a portfolio is. If we take a series of these project investments, and we're talking about project portfolios to start with, then we can define this as a portfolio. Of course, we cannot strip away the business case from the project. So I guess the problem, solution, and output are also part of the definition of the project. So again, we're talking about a project portfolio here. But what happens when the project finishes? What happens when the project closes after it has delivered its output? How are we able to follow through, increase the chances of outcomes and essentially value happening? So we need to expand the focus of our portfolio to include outcomes, benefits, essentially values. And then we're starting to define what we call organizational portfolio management, organizational portfolio, a construct that is much more strategic than projects and programs, and allow us to manage the whole value creation process of our organization, starting with projects, but also extending it to programs, and perhaps, as I will present a little bit earlier, other assets that create value, such as services, such as products, and generally enabling operations. So back to project portfolio management, you will probably recognize that operations, what the organization does, implements strategy. And whenever we want something new, we can define constructs of projects and programs that will deliver something new and release it back into operations. And then we can define project portfolio management as that layer of management that connects the strategic planning layer into with the project and program layer, so it enables more efficient and effective implementation, essentially, of the strategy. So then we're used to seeing projects and portfolios being presented as that thing that ensures that we're doing the right projects, portfolio management, and then project management doing projects right. So essentially efficiency and effectiveness together. Necessary for any organization to thrive. Otherwise, any other combination gives us survival, dying slowly or dying quickly, depending on which of the two dimensions, effectiveness or efficiency, we're concentrating by ignoring the other one. Why is portfolio management relevant to organizations? Okay, we can understand that this is a whole presentation built around this, but how is it relevant to project managers, project practitioners? Well, research, in my opinion, very important, although older research proves that projects are much more successful when program and project and portfolio management layers exist in the organization. So it's a major concern for project managers to know where their projects come from. What's the strategic connection? What are some of the priorities in terms of managing risks and managing stakeholders, for instance? How can changes in the organizational environment or its strategy or the economic, broader economic environment influence the importance that their project has, and therefore the support that it can receive from sponsors? So zooming into portfolio management and getting into more specifics, the origins of this management concept for organizations comes from Harry Markowicz's theory from the 50s, which he created a unique approach to investing stock, being able to evaluate the performance of investments versus their risk, or their promise for return on investment versus their risk. So in the 80s, Warren McFarlane took this core theory and applied it onto projects and organizations for the purpose of being able to have a theory that selects a basket of projects with the purpose of minimizing disasters, minimizing the chances of all projects or many projects failing at the same time, essentially applying diversification of type, of risk, of size or maturity horizon to the portfolio to ensure that value is released at the desired assumed risk. So in Classical portfolio theory, it is easy as an investor. You go and you choose the stock, let's say, that you want to invest in. The golden egg there, there's a market for that. You go and you purchase the investment, and then you wait for it to mature. And of course, we know that there is a risk and a cost and a return for that. But when it comes to organizations and investments of projects, we know that there is no market to go often and buy that golden egg. You need to build the chicken that's going to lay that egg. You need a project that's going to lay that investment. So the chicken is the project and the output is the egg. It's not an investment yet because the promise of return is through the effective use of the output, not the output itself. But let me also remind you that every investment has a cost, a risk, and a potential return. And so do projects. Wait just a second. Projects just have a cost and a risk. The project itself is the means to the end of creating the output, which in time becomes the investment that has an additional risk of it hatching. And that's where the return, but also the total cost of ownership, which we also often forget. So a portfolio is a basket, essentially. Our organizational portfolio is a basket of organizational assets that produce value. These assets can be projects or programs, as we mentioned, but can also be products, services, other supporting assets and operations. When these investments hatch, they produce, well, not another chicken. They don't produce projects. I think an omelette maybe, or a chicken soup is a more successful metaphor for what this investment could be. Something that produces value to a user or to society or to whoever is the beneficiary, essentially, of that output. So then the project portfolio that I described, or I use this pyramid to talk about, now becomes on organizational portfolio management and portfolio, where you see the portfolio management area of concern is expanded now to include other assets, not just projects and programs, but their outputs as well. That is, again, to repeat, products, services, operations, or other as defined by every organization. So in an organizational portfolio, we group together, it's a construct, first of all, that we've created. We've defined certain attributes to this construct, and this construct groups together organizational investments, which can be organized, which can be organizational projects and projects, but also relate investment required to operationally support and exploit the results of these projects, programs. So organizational portfolio provides better strategic, financial, and value creation focus for the portfolio as a whole. So the portfolio can include all these components, essentially. Here's an example of an organizational portfolio structure. We start with the strategic objectives being at the top, a result of strategic planning, annual or multi-annual. And then, as we described, these are implemented through operations and projects and programs, and their resulting components, which are services, products, and other. So the portfolio management layer sits in the middle to organize these components into smaller buckets or baskets and connect them explicitly to organizational objectives, as I mentioned, for better strategic and financial control. So we have multiple projects, coming back to perhaps a more specific example of a project portfolio. We have multiple projects and a portfolio of them, and we also need effective methods to manage them. So this is what the squared methodologies are about, presenting a process model to manage portfolios effectively, a governance model to help us make decisions, roles and responsibility, essentially, artifacts, and mindsets, which are always necessary to integrate the processes, the activities, and everything we do in portfolio management. But we need also a step-by-step manual for that, just like the IKEA manual. Something that will tell us what I need to do to manage my portfolio, when do I have to do it, how frequently do I run every process or activity, who has to do it, we need a governance for that, an explicit assignment of responsibilities, and how do we do it? What are the skills? What are the processes again? What are the artifacts perhaps? And it's very, very useful to understand why we're doing anything of this sort. So a good methodology like the squared methodology does will explain to us the purpose of everything that we do. A governance I mentioned is necessary to make decisions. At the center of the governance, we have the portfolio manager. Portfolio manager gets their mandate and packages organizational objectives from the strategic layer into a portfolio. Of course, they don't do all this alone. They have a portfolio office or a portfolio support office to help them with the administration of all this, and they get the to approve decisions through the portfolio directing group, which has the accountability of the performance of the composition and the performance of the portfolio. Where do they get their information? From the portfolio advisory committee, which is comprised by component representatives, people down in the field, service managers, project managers and program managers, operations management managers and product managers. And for this governance model to be effective, we need to have an explicit allocation of responsibilities for everything described in portfolio management to the respective role. We couldn't have a portfolio presentation without talking about the infamous portfolio funnel. But essentially what portfolio management does is allows for a collection of investments to be composed. That means identifying, but all at the same time, assessing and filtering out components that will end up in the portfolio, which we manage in terms of monitoring, control, and realization to achieve the objectives of the portfolio. And also we do this in iterations, because every so often we need to reassess the composition of the portfolio and maybe change the mix. The PfM² portfolio management process is comprised by 5 processes. Portfolio framework definition process, which allows us to define the objectives and the process that we're going to follow for managing an organizational portfolio. A portfolio composition process that allows us to select and compose our portfolio and approve it. And the portfolio realization process that helps us increase the chances that the portfolio will achieve its objectives and deliver its value. Throughout the duration of the portfolio, we're also engaging stakeholders. Essentially, portfolio management cannot happen in isolation, but also monitoring, controlling the portfolio. If you want to zoom in each one of them, and we won't do that now, I'll just flash the complete portfolio process. You'll see that for every one of these 5 processes, there's a series of activities that explicitly, step by step, define what we need to do to manage the portfolio effectively. I talked about the composition process, for instance. It reminds me, I think it's a very good metaphor to use this kid's toy. Essentially, your portfolio, as defined in its portfolio framework definition, allows for certain components, certain type of components, but also size and other characteristics to enter the portfolio. So this is the portfolio composition exercise, where we identify and qualify components to enter a portfolio. If you want to see this with the hands of a portfolio manager in action, then this is a better picture than before. In organizations, very often we try to fit too many things. Over-optimistic estimates of both value, but also cost and effort, causes us to sometimes these abstract things that we call investments or projects and programs, to fit them in our annual work plan or our portfolio. Well, this is not always possible, not always visible either. So portfolio composition process will help us, portfolio management process will help us balance these. And that is if we care, because who chairs sometimes and nothing really matters, could be a funny way of looking at the attitude of some organizations regarding doing more than they can swallow. So, nearing the end of my presentation of this teaser for portfolio management, I think the starting point for anybody who wants to harness the power and the effectiveness of portfolio management, we start with developing or understanding, first of all, and developing a portfolio orientation. What does that mean? Well, it's the willingness and the orientation of an organization to harness portfolio management through strong organizational commitment to strategic effectiveness, operational efficiency, risk management, accountability, and transparency. If these are not a concern in your organization, then portfolio management has little hope. Also, reviewing all work as organizational investments is a key to building a case for portfolio management. Organization-wide recognition of the value of portfolio management as a performance enabler in the organization, seamless integration of portfolio processes and mindsets into everyday working. Portfolio management is very deeply integrated to everything that we do in the organization. And finally, strong portfolio governance based on data-driven decision-making, not decibel-driven decision-making, and integrating reporting at all levels. So if you want to learn more about portfolio management, I can also advertise a masterclass as part of this conference coming up online in January, where we get to explore in much more details and hands-on some of these concepts of portfolio management. And with this, I conclude my presentation, and I think we have a few minutes left to open for questions, if there are any.
Thank you very much, Nicos, for this very illuminating presentation with regards to the way you look at portfolio management, which is the